Morning. My name is Chipo Nyambuya, and I am an attorney here in Chicago. My area of practice spans widely from corporate technology, copyright, and procurement to rule of law and development, international development. Today we will be discussing the international rule of law, essentially providing foundations and a primer for rule of law in development and post-conflict contexts. So today we're going to be discussing international rule of law, specifically within the post-conflict and development contexts. My background and my experience is specifically within West Africa and some exposure to East Africa. So a lot of the examples that I'll be sharing today will be within the context of African applications and context of the application of rule of law in development and or post-conflict contexts. So as we begin the conversation, we will initially start with kind of the foundations and the genesis of international law, which is really kind of the genesis of rule of law in development and post-conflict contexts. From there, we will move to how rule of law is defined within development and post-conflict contexts and what that means for practical applications, and then kind of have a brief discussion on critiques as well as issues to be mindful of as you kind of proceed down this line of trying to establish or reform rule of law within a development or a post-conflict context. So, let us begin. As a foundation, rule of law in an international context really began with President Woodrow Wilson's judiciary and the judicial system fair and accessible to citizens? And is it fair and accessible to citizens outside of large urban areas? Is it fair and accessible to citizens in rural areas, which tend to be under-resourced? So those are essentially the two contexts and approaches as you go into either establishing or assessing the rule of law. Now, whatever the case, as you are assessing the rule of law, there are key institutions that have to kind of be included and have to participate in this process. There's judicial participation. You have to have judicial participation, whether it is the courts or the judges themselves, or whether it is the administration of the judiciary that has to participate. You have to first decide what level of judicial participation has to happen, and then who will then participate from the judiciary, who will then, from the judicial branch, who will then participate in that process of either establishing a rule of law within a post-conflict context or reforming the rule of law within the development context. If there were judges and there was a judiciary pre-war, how many of those human resources are still in that context? How well trained are those resources? In my work in West Africa, there were often justices of the peace who were not judges but were